All ready to go.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. It's 5 o'clock here in London. So welcome to day 3 of Yeast versus COVID hackathon. So I am delighted to be joined today by three most incredible speakers. So one of them is already on the call. Gretchen, good morning to you. I think it's morning where you are.
It is bare. Well, no, we just crossed noon.
Oh, is it? Okay, so I need to still work on my time zone understanding. Okay, perfect. So it's not too early where you are. This is fantastic. So we do have our first speaker here today, but before we begin our stream and before we begin the talk, which I know, Gretchen, you pre-recorded so that we enjoy the quality of the talk. So I just wanted to congratulate you all because it's day 3. And I didn't expect so many teams to be online in the morning and throughout the day. So well done to you all. I expected you all to tune in a little bit later, but I have seen a lot of activity and a lot of work done by almost every single team. So I know American teams are waking up now, and it's good to have them join this stream as well. So, but it's fantastic work that you all are undertaking. I know some of you are a little bit ahead of the others. Many of you have already completed your design thinking process. I can see some of you are still questioning why this is necessary. And I can just remind you that 9 out of 10 startups fail. And one of the main reasons why this happens is because they don't understand their user. They don't spend enough time researching, and they really don't understand the why. And that is one of the reasons why many of them fail. They just dive into developing this tech product without really spending enough time with the users. So please trust me, when we have put together this framework, and we have been developing this for 5 years now, what we have understood is that process is really important. And it is only a recent element we've introduced a new layer, the ethics, because I feel this is a process where we need to discuss ethics in addition to human-centered design. And this is the reason why, as I promised to you, I would bring the best ethics speakers and experts onto these streams, so that you can understand the importance of why it's important to embed ethical guidelines and consider ethics during the very early stage of building the product. And again, many tech companies ignore that, and that is a real shame, because they build something, they get this product out, and then they realize that they have made a big mistake. And it's not only small companies, startups, it's also about big companies. One of our speakers have already raised the issue of Tay chatbot. She was brought out into the world of Twitter so randomly and so fast. They didn't expect that Tay would be learning from the users. And then eventually she started abusing the users because the users were throwing really bad and horrible comments at her. And she was learning because she was built, on the latest machine learning technologies and algorithms. And there are so many other ways where you can get it wrong. And that is the reason why we cover design thinking in the very beginning of product development, because it's how it should be, and ethics as well, so that you understand what might happen, and so that you could prevent those mistakes from happening, because we really don't want mistakes that could be costly. And because they are ongoing, they're happening all the time. And we want to make sure that you're not just developing a product for the sake of developing, that you are addressing a real need. And I've always maintained, and I will say this again to you, and probably not for the last time, if there is no problem to solve, why solve it? So I always say, please find a problem, a real problem, and solve it. And solving is not only about creating a tech product. It's more than that. Technology is always the easiest thing to build, but it's about trying to understand why you're doing this and whether it will address the real need is what's really important. Okay, so this is my rant of the day. I've had to say this because many of you are still struggling to understand why this is important. So I can see many of you are making comments online because I've asked you what it is that you're looking forward to today. So you all seem to be looking forward to the ethics talk, but also the tech talk, which will happen a little bit later. So you're looking forward to the Google Cloud workshop today. I can see the highlight of yesterday was Samira's talk. Many of you are already learning Flask and various other tools. So a lot of progress already. So well done to all of you who are working so tirelessly on your products. So with this in mind, Gretchen, I'm coming to you. How are you today, and how is the lockdown affecting you? Are you working from home? How's this all happening where you are?
I am working from home. I work in San Francisco, but I was on a trip visiting family in Massachusetts, and
Yeah.
both areas are in lockdown. But I made the choice to stay here. So I'm working from home. It's not a complete lockdown compared to some parts of the world. Like, you can still go out and exercise. It's recommended to wear masks, but it's not enforced by the police. Although it might be in stores, but not in public if you're, keeping distance. So, I mean, working in the house, trying to figure out what to do about making a contribution to this moment in history, to try to improve things both for near neighbors and family members, and more broadly. So, should I draw on my background as a mathematician and do epidemiology modeling? Should I, draw on my work as an ethicist and say, these are the issues we need to think about as we start using drones and contact tracing? So my participation in this is part of that search, to, both anyone who is participating to make this a better time in your lives in terms of education, but to make you part of the force that can go forward and make things better now at this critical time and thereafter. And I want to sort of echo Elena's rant, and I have a parallel rant, which is, I actually don't want to make you a machine learning engineer. That can be one step in your career. And if that's the thing that you'd like to do, I absolutely want to help you do that. But I want to make you a founder. And I want to make you top leadership in the big tech companies if that's the direction your career is going. And when you are a machine learning engineer, no one is going to teach you some of the things that you're learning today. And if you're here for a time for tech and you're going to be our next president, I am so excited, actually, sitting in the US, that you will know something about tech and ethics, and you will be our next president. And I want to, help our country by helping you be better in that position. And I know this is a global audience, and that is great, because maybe I am also speaking to the next prime minister. And I'm also speaking to the next, member of the House of Commons. Whatever direction you're going to go in your career, I want you to understand something about science and AI and ethics, and about solving real problems, about figuring out what are the most important problems, what are the skills and resources we have as individuals, as companies, as societies, and how do we pair those up? Which are the problems that we can make progress on, and how? And at the same time, how do we not cause more problems? So when we talk about AI and ethics, part of that is about how to avoid causing problems while you're fixing problems. So the idea of, is the thing you're going to do actually going to make a positive contribution to the problem you have identified? Because maybe not. So thinking that through. And what other mess are you making? Because actually it's really easy to make messes. So thinking about all of that, because, if you're looking at it purely from a business standpoint, if you're not solving a real problem with a real market and a real customer, you might get first round funding anyway. You still might. You might get second round funding, but eventually this business will fail.
Exactly.
So I'm really glad that you're all here. I'm really glad that Elena and the rest of the leadership in this has put the focus that they have. I didn't realize to what extent this hackathon differed from other hackathons, and I am so pleased that I have found this one. I've been really enjoying working with all of the Americas teams, and I am handicapped only by my ability to only speak English and by my time zone, because the next time I want to be completely global, and I'm glad you're all here.
Fantastic. I really enjoyed that rant. Thank you so much. That was amazing. And I absolutely just excited you're echoing everything I've said. So this is a very special hackathon. It's not just about technology. It's about so many other things. And most teams have understood this, and I'm so happy to see this. Some teams are still struggling to understand this. But you will get there. I promise you, you will get there. Just as if you remember Luca yesterday, when he first came to the hackathon, he was only 14. All he wanted to do was just build. And now, yesterday, when I was speaking to him off the call, off the live stream, he told me, Elena, did you know I actually joined this startup called Walk-In, and I had to run through a design thinking process with them because they have never heard of it. They didn't even know it existed. So I went, he said, to IDEO website. I learned all these courses, and I went back to them and said, guys, we really need to do this process because you don't understand, your end user, and we really need to do this before you actually build this technology. So he went in as a full stack developer, ended up actually teaching them these processes. And it is such a massive transformation in Luca. I know he's watching probably this live, and it's incredible because I have seen him grow for 5 years now, from a little boy who was only 14 to now 19, who have never been to university. He has never done a single university course. He just did an apprenticeship. And he asked me, Elena, why do I need to go to university? I am already a full stack developer. I can build, but I want a real hands-on experience in a real startup, in a place where I can make a difference. And that's what happens to him. But those of you who are still struggling to understand why this process is important, Luca and so many of the other mentors, design thinkers and ethicists, we have got so many of them in Discord channel. Please ask them, and they will be happy to share their experience. But I'm telling you, you are going to learn a lot. If you came into this hackathon as an engineer, you are going to learn so much more than just being an engineer building stuff. So with this in mind, Gretchen, I am going to ask Sarah whether we're ready to show your incredible talk. Sarah, are we ready?
Yeah, we're ready to go. Just one little comment that we saw on the live chat by Ignacio, just saying thank you so much, Gretchen, for your help. I'm very grateful. So with that note, we're going to move on to the video.
Let's do it.
Hi, I'm Gretchen Green. I'm a fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School of Public Policy. I'm going to talk to you today about facial recognition and some of the ethics and policy issues attached to it. So any of you who watch crime shows, at least in the US, are well familiar with the idea that, oh, we have this video of a crime happening over here. If only we knew who that was, we'll just run it through our facial recognition system. We have this list over here that's compiled from all of these sources, and boop, 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 oh, we know who it is. That actually is John Smith. He's a known terrorist, and we've got pictures now that we can connect with where else he is, information about what flight he just came into LAX on. So there are systems like that. Whether they work quite as well or as quickly or have as big a database as they show on TV, that's another question. But a lot of states in the US are contributing driver's license photographs, and the State Department contributes photographs from passports. And then law enforcement agencies get together and contribute pictures from people who are arrested. It does start to get to be a lot of pictures. And then we have, a few months ago, there was news out about the company Clearview. And so we've got the government database and the government uses, specifically in law enforcement, and I'll talk about some other uses. And then we've got the companies like Facebook, Apple. So if you have an iPhone,
You can unlock it with your face if it's a recent model. And if you have some other devices, you may be able to do the same thing using it as a password. I've also got Facebook, where at least in some countries, they may have stopped in Europe now because of GDPR, but when you tag your friends and your family and you say, oh, who are these people in this picture, you're training the machine learning model. So think about if all of the outdoor cameras were connected, and that depends a little bit on where you live. London is renowned for the number of CCTV cameras, but other places have their share. So if you imagine at every street corner, say, there was a camera that if you walked past it would know that you were there because it had facial recognition, and it would put that back. I mean, the camera itself doesn't have to have it, but that footage has to go someplace that does. Well, now for your outdoor walking activities, if we know you were at this corner, and we know 5 minutes later you were at this corner, and 5 minutes later you were at this corner, and so on, we have a pretty good idea you probably walked this line. You didn't just teleport from one corner to the next. And maybe, you went over here and came back, but we know you didn't go by another corner. So we start to be able to track you all across the city. And if we didn't just do this on one day, and I know it depends, maybe you drive everywhere, but maybe it's a good camera and it can see inside your car. But even if we just take the people, we'll just assume that you're at university, for instance, or if you were too young to have a car, maybe you're in your parents' car. But if you can do this tracking, and now you say some of these cameras are going to be in stores, and I'm going to see, what's happening in the store, because the cameras are in stores. California had California Privacy Consumer Protection Act, CCPA came out, went into effect January 1st, and all of a sudden, because of the disclosure requirements, we know Macy's has cameras in their store that are using facial recognition for fraud detection. And we know some other stores have cameras in their store using facial recognition. And we know they're selling information. And we know they're combining this information with other information. So they're watching people. They're using cameras and other sensors. They're also using sensors from the phone to determine location. How long do you stand in front of a certain product? Do you interact with it? Do you seem engaged? What do you seem to be looking at? Let's follow your eyes. And what have you bought in the past? Because if we can do facial recognition and we can line it up to who you are, then we have other information about you. And our partners that we're selling things to and we're buying things from, they do too. So all of these things can start to come together. Some of the uses, so the driver's licenses, the reason they're available, those pictures, to be sold, and why that happened fairly early, is it was for fraud detection was the original use in the departments of motor vehicle. And it was, is someone applying for 2 different driver's licenses using the same face? And the same thing was a worry for passports. Is there some sort of fraud going on? There's the question of benefits, fraud or eligibility, where biometrics are being used to determine, are you the one who qualified for these benefits, or are you someone else trying to sneak into the system? It's being used to try to reunite separated refugee families, because if one of them has a picture of the rest of the family and then the rest of the family goes and has their picture taken, those things can be brought together, which seems like a beautiful use. And yet, then there's also the question of, if people are being forced to have their picture taken and put into a facial recognition system, are there problems with that? Well, if you were in the US and you did not agree with the federal immigration policy, then you wouldn't necessarily want to help ICE, which is the Immigration Enforcement Office. Who do you think, if you were ICE, you'd like to talk to. You'd like to talk to the people who have facial recognition systems for you, especially those people in the stores. I'm not saying that they are, but if I were them, I would, because people have to go to stores, because they have to eat and they have to have clothes. And they don't necessarily have to go to the store. Maybe they can give money to someone else and get them to go into the store. And that's something that like ICE has been trying to catch people by catching people who are going to stores. Facial recognition would be a way to do that. If it were available cheaply to private investigators, imagine if you were in the witness protection program. So in the US, that's the program by the federal government. If you testify for a serious crime where the defendant is so dangerous that the only way that people can be convinced that they should testify is if they, and maybe they and their family, can be given completely new identities by the federal government, moved to a new location so that they won't be killed. No one is going to testify if that was the thing that they needed, if they know that that defendant and the defendant's colleagues can access national networks of faces that are tied to facial recognition systems where they can say, this is the one I want you to find, and it can search and find them. Think about the case of a domestic violence victim and the same thing. They're trying to hide. They don't have the same support by the federal government, but they're trying to do the same thing, trying to keep from being killed. So if the ability to search for people by their faces in sort of national network databases becomes like easily available and cheap, it becomes problematic. But even if it's more expensive and it's only the government or only powerful corporations, even if it's only online and not in person, there are problems with it. It's a chilling effect on civil liberties to attend political rallies, to attend churches or houses of worship, if you're worried that it's unpopular, or that you would be likely to be a victim of a hate crime. There are activities you will be afraid to do if it's too easy to figure out that it was you that was there. So those are some of the concerns to think about, and I'm happy to talk with any of you who are interested in talking any further. Now you have kind of a survey of some of the uses and some of the concerns. It's often marketed as either for convenience or security. So think about whether you think those are good enough reasons. We do a lot of things for convenience. And it's always hard to make an argument against security. But there are other kinds of security to keep the freedoms that we have. Thanks very much. Have a great hackathon.
All right. That was a fantastic talk. So, Gretchen, thank you so much for recording this. So I can see everyone is really some great comments right on the call, and we do have a couple of questions. And I'm going to dive straight away into this first question. Ankita Sharma is asking you, what is your view on police forces having facial recognition and being able to leave what? And being able to leave, look at a person and see their past. Okay. So what is your view on police forces having facial recognition and being able to look at a person and see their past criminal record? Does that not bring a judicial bias?
My overall view is that facial recognition is like doing a cost benefit analysis. I don't think that the benefits are high enough compared to the risk for law enforcement to be using it. So at all. However, if you want to ask what is the bias that's introduced when I look at a person and I see in real time the background of their arrests and so forth, one question to ask is compare it to the current situation. So what do you think? And can you run some experiments to prove that what you think is true, or to come to another hypothesis? What do you think is going on now? So if the situation right now is that a police officer will look at someone and say, based on the color of their skin, I will make the following assumptions. And I will assume that they are armed and dangerous on that alone. In that situation, would it be better that the information that they saw narrowed it down and said, oh, when I see someone, now I will go and take action based on their past criminal history instead of the color of their skin? Both in that will mean people who previously would have gotten bad treatment, some of those people will get better treatment, and other people who would have previously gotten a kind of good treatment that they wouldn't have deserved, and that the officer would be in danger when they shouldn't have been. If they said a whole other group of people, right, that they were assuming they were safe when in fact they weren't. So you really have to make that comparison. Like, I absolutely understand why, if you're in law enforcement, you are looking for tools to do your job better. And if you're in law enforcement, if you were an officer on the street, it's, you have maybe very little time to make a decision about what you are going to do. And if you get it wrong, someone might die. It might be you, it might be them, it might be a bystander. So, those are some of the things to balance.
Yeah. We have another question from.
We have quite a few questions.
How can we ensure that facial recognition software is used solely for good and not for malpractice?
One thing to do is to put political systems in place and elect or otherwise have government representatives that are doing what is best for society. Mm-hmm. So that's not a technical answer, but any tool wielded by someone who is trying to do you ill, or who doesn't care whether they do or don't do you ill, is likely to do bad things to you, right? So a lot of it has to do with who has power.
Yeah.
And so you can say, as an engineer, what can I do? Or as a company, what can I do? And those are maybe different answers. So a company that provides an API then actually has very little control over who is using it how. So you can ask if there are ways they can maintain control, and should they? But then you should also compare the question to a pencil. If I am a manufacturer of pencils, is it my responsibility to decide what someone writes with them? And do you think that, the answer is the same for pencils as it is for facial recognition as it is for guns?
Wow. Very good analogy.
Yeah, great analogy and lots to consider. So we have another question from Arian. How much access does the government have to our technology, mainly smartphones? Do you know how much access?
What was the end? Maybe smart what?
How much access does the government have to our technology? And is it mainly smartphones that they have this information from, that they extract this information from, or is it something else?
So I don't know the answer, and it would depend on what country that you're sitting in.
Yeah.
And it might depend on, say, in the United States, what state you're sitting in. So if you're at which part of the government you're asking about.
Yeah.
So I would assume in the United States that the government can get a warrant to access all information on your smartphone. But I don't know what the requirements for that warrant would be. So when they can or cannot. So when the private company, if they want to, could push back. But there's also the question of when a private company would choose to cooperate, even without a legal order to do so.
Right. There's another question which is slightly more technical, we can say. It's where would we draw the line between wanting to make facial recognition cheap to develop, which would maybe get more people to develop it, versus having facial recognition which is done more securely and more privatized, let's say.
Right. I don't think I caught the whole question. Your volume kind of came in and out.
Yeah, of course. So the first part is where would we draw the line between making facial recognition cheap to develop, which would maybe lead to more people being able to develop it, which can maybe lead to making it better, versus the security aspect to it.
I was still having the same trouble. Can you just copy and paste it into the chat? Is that a thing?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I'm going to read out another question. In times of crisis like this, facial recognition could be very useful for things like contact tracing. Do the benefits of harnessing facial recognition outweigh the costs to people's privacy?
So first, in the question of contact tracing, there's a question of how useful facial recognition actually would be in that. It's probably more useful in quarantine enforcement. Mm-hmm. So if you want to say that a certain person has to stay in their house, and then you want to figure out if they've left, facial recognition seems potentially useful for that, because if you are monitoring everyone who's at the corner down the street and you know who those people are, you can check them against a list. For contact tracing, you could use it, but then you would have to, I guess, be imagining that, so some other signal, it could be video, is used to see if people are getting close to each other. The app that Google and Apple are working on together right now is using your phone data, and they're trying to preserve that no one ever actually knows who it is that got close, only that you're keeping a record of things having gotten close so someone can be notified. You were near someone. So it depends maybe a little bit on in contact tracing if you're imagining you want kind of a voluntary notification, or if we're looking at central government trying to monitor who it was, because there could be ways to notify someone that, for instance, their phone came near another phone, or that they were at the train station the same time somebody else who voluntarily put in the information that they had been there, like without needing faces. So where I would draw the line of privacy, if I knew, like as an individual, if I felt confident that we were going to do contact tracing at all, whether it uses facial recognition or not. We were going to do it in a way that was only for now. The systems we were developing would be used only for this crisis, which is like nothing that we've ever seen, in trying to improve, this terrible trade-off we're having to make between the economy and public health. I would be much happier about saying, okay, sure, watch everything that I do for a month and then destroy it, and then destroy the architecture and the infrastructure that built it. Because if you build it, you will use it again. I mean, that is my fear, much more than what are you collecting right now. Let's see. So was there another question?
Yeah. There's a lot of questions about if the government can control your phone.
It seems to me it's easy for me to hear Elena. It's hard for me to hear Sarah. I don't know why.
Okay. So let me read it out to you. It's in the chat. Where would we draw the line between wanting to make facial recognition software be cheap to develop, which would maybe get people more to develop and use it, versus security?
Well, it's already cheap. Depends on what you mean by cheap. Like so much about how to write facial recognition software is already available for free on GitHub sites that you can access. And API calls are not that expensive depending on what you're trying to do. So if we're talking about cheap for like first world countries, for people who are fairly well off, you don't even need to be a company to do this. Now, what you might talk about is, how accurate is it? So if you don't have, I'm not sure on cheap versus security, whether that really seems like the trade-off that we're making. I mean, the fact that it's cheap means in some sense security is terrible. If by security, I mean my personal security, that people are more likely to be using it. It's more likely that your face is sort of out there in more data sets.
Okay, I have a little drama happening in the house. My son desperately wants to run in and interrupt my flow.
Because you have a question about facial recognition. That's all he needs to get on camera.
I know, exactly. This is it. But I just wanted to say thank you, Gretchen. I know we have got a lot of questions for you, and I would like to invite everyone to ask those questions in Discord, because we have another speaker here waiting, and his talk is actually going to cover contact tracing. So stay tuned, because the title of the talk is exactly that: Privacy Now, the Issues, the EU and COVID contact tracing. So this was a very good question to end our conversation with, because we're going to carry on talking about this and other matters with Toby. So thank you so much, Gretchen, for joining us. And we can't wait to see you again in Discord. And thank you for all the time you have already offered to us. And you're still going to be helping, with all the teams in Discord. So please do join us back in Discord, everyone. But do carry on listening to what Toby has to say. Thank you, Gretchen. We won't hold you back.
Thank you very much. Toby's talk sounds like the perfect thing to come next.
Yes, indeed. Yes. So thank you. All right, Toby, hi, and say hi to us. Unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi, good to see you, Toby. How are you?
All good, thank you. All dealing with all of the same crazy issues that everybody else is, from kids on Zoom. I have a new icebreaker for every Zoom meeting, which is you ask a 6-year-old's math question to start every Zoom call. And the world gets better at math that way, which is great. I'm dealing with all of the challenges that some of the crew who are working here on the hackathon are looking at. So I'm just looking at the topics that everybody's working on. Amazing topics, exactly the topics that it's really great to see those topics around, whether it's mental health or connectedness or bringing to, addressing fake news or contact tracing and those sorts of things. And being able to apply the topics that Gretchen was just talking about, how we're applying privacy and ethics to that is pretty important. And I was, you'll hear now on my talk, I was describing a time, when was Facebook created? 2009? 2009, I think it was. It was public in 2009.
Something like that. I think the question should be, should it have been created?
Well, Gretchen was talking about the genie out of the bottle, so
yeah.
I remember a time just before Facebook was created when I was dealing with some pretty gnarly privacy issues around not can we, but should we?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are right now. The legal frameworks don't exist fully. Yeah. So what are our ethical frameworks? And I'm really, really excited to see that all the members of the hack, what balance they place on their ethical frameworks and how much consideration they give that in the amazing solutions I'm sure they will build. So I talk a little bit about that.
Fantastic. So, we do have this Excel sheet that I have shared. So thank you for looking at it and giving us your feedback. I have added the very last column on ethics. And this asks you, what might go wrong. And this is really the reason why we have so many ethics talks, so that you could really consider. So Sarah, whenever you're ready, let's play Toby's talk, and then we'll have Toby again for a brief 10-minute Q&A afterwards. Are you ready?
Yeah, good to go.
Let's go.
Hey, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are around the world. My name's Toby Goldblatt, and I'm talking to you about privacy now. Do no harm is not good enough, and some of the issues and ethics, what the European Union is doing, and the issues related to COVID-19 contact tracing in particular. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here. I've known Elena for a while. But it's great to see some of the topics that you're all focusing on, see people focusing on the mental health, looking at the hospitals and supply chain topics, looking at fake news, looking at mentoring less able groups, really, really fantastic topics. And if I can help at all, then please contact me. You can see my LinkedIn and my Twitter at the bottom of this page. Please contact me after this talk. So who am I? So I'm an exec in charge of data and AI for a company called Avanade, which is a joint venture between Microsoft and Accenture. But I got a background in youth work, digital marketing, startups, and recently doing what's called corporate scale-ups, which is effectively big companies trying to act like startups. But I've been involved in the space for too long. But some of the coolest projects that you might want to talk to me about, I'm doing right now. So we're doing virtual agents to help hospitals and governments manage the COVID surge, doing that in Spain, doing it in Sweden, doing it in Ireland, doing it in India, doing it in Austria, in the US, all over the place. Looking at some COVID tracking solutions as well. In my past, I've done stuff that's looking at how do we effectively track grant distribution in some pretty rough environments, like in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as building a 700 million global fan base for people like Chelsea, and delivering recommendation engines for telcos as well in 40 different languages. So pretty fun and diverse stuff. My passion is really tackling the world's biggest challenges using AI at scale and making sure that we deliver a lasting human impact. I've seen too many AI projects that are effectively just doing proof of concept, and really it's how do we get all of the components working together to drive AI at scale is really where I'm focused on. So the stuff that you guys are doing is absolutely at the heart of some of that, and it's great to see. So thank you for having me. I live in London, and I got 3 daughters. So this is super topical for me as well. And I think some of the best ideas come out of teens, frankly, and it's incumbent on people like me to help you scale them. So that's what I'm here and how I'm helping out. So in relation to the topic, really want to talk about where we're at, right? So we're in the middle of a revolution. That's tremendously scary, but exciting times. And every revolution has brought with it new challenges and opportunities. So whether that's the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the information revolution, or what we're in now, whatever you want to call this revolution. So we have huge benefits that are coming right now in terms of enhanced automation, use of AI, reducing human error, reducing manual tasks. But it brings with it a whole bunch of challenges. And it's not just the COVID challenges, but we live with challenges around data security, mass surveillance, and social engineering, and how we respond to some of those activities. And that's pretty critical. And how we ensure that we build a culture of privacy in the solutions that we build with a proper ethical approach is fundamentally critical to what we do and to be some of the winners and losers right now. And it's even more prevalent because we haven't figured this stuff out. And then we're living through one of the most traumatic periods in modern history around the COVID crisis, and how we are going to maintain privacy in an ethical approach when we do some really tricky stuff like some of the contact tracing and related activities. So we're going to talk about some of those stuff. And as one of my crew, when I was talking to them about this presentation, said to me, with great power comes great responsibility. And that was pretty much said best by Peter Parker of the Spider-Man movies. That's exactly what we've got going on here. This is, we have great, tremendous power with the technology we have. How do we maintain the responsibility and approach it appropriately? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, let's just move on here. So what is digital ethics? What are the privacy issues in the age of AI, the age we're in right now? So there's a whole bunch of them, but I simplify it down with my company Avanar to 6 main things. There are issues around surveillance, right? So I'll give you an example. So in China, there's a social credit system, and there's been some issues around that, around passengers perhaps being blocked from buying plane tickets, or people prevented leaving the country because they haven't paid taxes, or individuals being blocked from taking senior management roles in companies. So there's some issues that come from surveillance. Now, whether you believe those points or not, the surveillance culture can be used not to do good, for bad. And also you'll see there some issues around consumer privacy. So how do we make sure that when we're managing the data of individuals, it's being done in a way that respects civil liberties, particularly in relation to privacy and data. And I had this situation 10 years ago now, just before Facebook came out. Just because the law has not yet clearly defined something is illegal doesn't mean that you can do it. There is always a gray area where the law hasn't caught up with data and digital, and that's where an ethical framework is absolutely critical, and particularly in the areas of consumer protection and privacy. There have been issues of people using data, of health data in the UK that have maybe broken, for very good purposes, but maybe not fully with full authentication of the individuals. So there's been some issues there. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but other issues around technical robustness. So there have, for example, been virtual agents and chatbots that have, the algorithm, as you may all know, has been speaking the wrong language, and there's low bias, and that's not helpful. But also legal accountability. So many of you will know the situation around if you had a autonomous vehicle, a taxi or whatever that ran a red light. Who's responsible for that? Is that the algorithm of the company that made it? Is it the driver in the car, or is it the passenger? Whose responsibility? So some of those issues are being worked through as well. Information veracity, and I know there's a couple of topics being talked about in the hackathon around that. And fake news is a real hot topic area that needs investigation. How do we ensure that the data, particularly around COVID, and so much of it, is valid and is factually accurate and validated? And also then diversity and inclusion. So how do we ensure that algorithms are calibrated in the way which actively prevents them from making discriminatory or prejudicial decisions? So, an example is a program in the US for risk assessment was biased by skin color. That can lead to some pretty dangerous consequences. So there are some broad ethical issues that we should be thinking about, and I'd urge you all to think about these 6 things when you're building your solutions in the hack. So moving on, this is a really interesting time, not just because of COVID, but many of you may or may not know that the European Union, which is one of the larger trading bodies and blocks around the world, it's got 446 million people, is just starting to legislate and create regulation around AI data, and privacy. There are 2 white papers out at the moment for consultation, so gathering public feedback on them, and their deadline is in May. So I'd urge you all, your pretty active crew, to engage with those and feed back your opinions of how that should be approached. Essentially, what the European Union is doing is saying that they're going to take an approach based around risk. And what is the impact of the algorithmic approach? So they're suggesting they would less regulate low-level risks, such as suggesting an appointment time to an individual, but heavily regulate high-level risk, like AI-enabled surgery or things like that. So there are some regulatory requirements that they're suggesting, which is that humans always have oversight over product development, that there's a retention of any training data that's used to train the algorithms, that organizations have to guarantee robustness and accuracy of their products, and that there are specific case requirements for any AI applications. And all of this data is maintained with a degree of privacy. To me, a lot of this is around appropriate security and storage of data, together with an ethical framework around how that data is used, and some pretty robust processes, which is not necessarily the case in every organization right now. So there's going to be quite a lot of change that comes along with this activity, and I'd urge you to think this through when you're looking at your solutions too. But what does this all mean in the current time? And we're all battling so pretty hard around against COVID. So, AI has undoubtedly got a significant role to play, already has had a role to play in terms of the tracking of the COVID-19 spread, of looking at any of the modeling activity and scenario planning, and it will have a critical role in whatever solution we come up with in terms of the period of contact tracing that we're going into. It already has in China and in Asia more broadly. However, there's a whole bunch of concerns around this, right? So where is that data being retained that relates to any COVID solution? What are the rights versus of the individual to privacy of the healthcare data versus the benefits of the masses around public health needs? What are the issues around responding to this activity globally versus centralizing all the power in kind of one place? How do we keep that honest and responsible? Who owns this data? Who is responsible for it? Is it owned by the individual in an employment situation, or is it owned by the employee? Who has the right to know whether I've got a temperature? Who has the right to know when I was feeling sick? And how do you deal with people who are vulnerable or maybe not necessarily of legal age in terms of children? And where are the standards for data use? So all of these privacy and ethical considerations have been thrown up massively in right now. We have to deal with them globally right now and locally, when really the legislators haven't yet legislated for them. So my ask of all of you guys is consider these things, and let's contribute now. Let's use this hack to come up with some really good considerations in the response that we're putting together in terms of our hack right now. And I'd urge you again to think about what is your ethical framework and how are you making sure that any data is secure and being used appropriately. So you can see that. So COVID is not just a transformative in terms of the healthcare environment and the way we operate. It's really going to move things forward in terms of set some standards around how we use privacy and ethics to address these types of activities. So before I close this thing out, I'm just going to talk to you about some questions that I think are really important for you to look at, to consider in contact tracing in particular, and ask yourselves, why are we doing this? Is the purpose clear? I think in contact tracing purely, you could argue, yes, it is. But in many of the adaptations of it and many of the data that might be collected, there may be, we need to have all the data. As a comment I often hear, rather than there being a real clear, transparent message about why we need the data. There's a conversation going on right now about what's the most appropriate technology. And that's not just in terms of technology effectiveness, it's also technology in terms of privacy and ethical framework. So for example, the debate that you may be seeing at the moment around, do we use Bluetooth technology, which Apple and Google were initially trying, or cellular tracking to look at the movement of people from some of the mobile telcos. Some different perspectives there. This one's really important, and this is about efficiency in everything we do and sustainability in everything we do. What's the absolute minimum data that we need? And how do we ensure that any collected data is solely used for COVID-19 mitigation and not for anything else? And how do we protect anonymity of those who want to be anonymous? How do we ensure that there's human oversight throughout the life cycle? And how do we ensure that individuals have control over their data? And that there's diversity in that approach to privacy, and it's secure. And the final question is, how do we serve the greatest amount of people in the most inclusive way, and that we don't leave anybody behind? Now, these are significant and searching questions. I don't have all the answers. I don't think anybody does right now. We are going through a period where we need everybody, and advocates such as the people who are taking part in this program, in this hack, to contribute to the debate and to try and make some standards and some leadership here. So I'm really excited. I'm fortunate to be part of the judging panel. I'm really excited to see the considerations around some of these topics that you'll be giving as we will build through the hack. So there's a pretty long quote here. I'll leave it up for a couple of minutes. My company is blogging about this a lot. Really, how do we ensure that we're safeguarding against dystopian future more broadly? If we're giving all of our data to a single digital agent, whatever it may be, and that digital agent has a relationship with that company who owns that digital relationship with a home security company or a job site or a credit bureau, how do we ensure that that company is applying the appropriate, that data supply chain is continuing to apply appropriate privacy and ethical framework in any decision making? So we have to tackle that as individuals as well, but we also have to look at that within the context of the COVID crisis that we are dealing with right now. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I'm looking forward to engaging with questions. There's a whole bunch of links and information we can share afterwards as well. Looking forward to engaging with you through this process, and looking forward to see what you come up with. So thank you very much and take care. Bye.
Hello. Okay, fantastic. So thank you, Toby. That was amazing. A little bit longer than I expected, but great. Fantastic story. And I can see there are lots of comments here already. And I'm going to take the first question asked by Lydia. And the question is, how did you get into this work, i.e. degree? What did you start off working in tech and AI? Or start later? Top tips to thrive in the industry. So yeah, how did you get into all of this? Tell us your story.
Okay, so aside, we were just talking when we were offline about wanting to get out of the industry, but I won't tell you about that bit. I'll tell you about how I got into it. So it was all about a real passion for transforming things, making it better. So I studied business and politics, which was okay and great. But really, I found I loved trying to make things better. And I got into making CD-ROMs I did two things. I was in the back of an ATM selling ATMs as an intern. And it was pretty boring, but I can tell you all the features of an ATM, But I guess in a couple of years when we do this talk, nobody will remember what an ATM is. But then what I did is I started making CD-ROMs for self-service government. And I realized in the mid-90s that the digital thing was the thing to do. And I went into digital marketing primarily. And digital marketing was the original big data. So I didn't come in it from a classic data science background, but then came from a digital marketing big data background into leveraging artificial intelligence to do recommendation systems and all those other things. And it was always with a passion and ethos for transforming, and always from having a human impact. So mine it really is a case of, everybody's got a foundational skill set, but it's kind of follow that passion, really to make a human impact, to look for the right projects, look for the right people, and that's kind of, how I am. I don't know where I'm going next, by the way. So no idea. And after this COVID thing, I have no idea what I'll be doing next. And I think that's half of the fun.
You should definitely join Teens in AI. Just resign, retire, and join Teens in AI.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Fantastic. All right. So I have another question here from Jordan. Jordan, you are our top contributor, just so you know, and we love having you ask all these questions. But this one, I will tell you off privately. The question is, I don't know how good your philosophy knowledge is, but that's patronizing, Jordan. But maximize good, minimize evil seems a very utilitarian approach to AI decisions. What do you think of other more case-per-case approaches?
Yeah, great. Love it. Thank you, Jordan. Let's carry this conversation on, and maybe you can teach me some philosophy. So I was telling Elena that that's what I would like to do when I get some time, is go back to school and do a philosophy degree and carry on learning, because I think we need that stuff right now. We need to go back to philosophical and ethical frameworks, look at some of the stuff we're doing. I mean, the point I was trying to make is the Google do good, don't be evil is not good enough right now. It's exactly the same point you're making, is that some of these decisions are really nuanced, and the debate was taking place across the world over an extended period of time. And I am involved in the EU's consultation, which was going out to the industry in Europe. And then COVID, and the debates just got accelerated, because I picked up the end of what Gretchen was saying, and the genie is really out of the bottle now. Some of these ethical debates, we are going to have to contact trace. We are going to have aggregated healthcare data on large numbers of individuals, whether they like it or not. And that is a great opportunity, but also scary. So we need all of those philosophical frameworks. And Jordan, if that's where you come from, and that you want to apply some perspectives on that, I would love to hear it, because I do not have the right answer. And I think the point right now is I'm not sure anybody does. And it's up to this community, this generation, to guide us as to what is appropriate ethically, and be cognizant of the decision-making frameworks of other generations, other groups, socioeconomic, geographical, and all those sorts of things. And when you look at it through that perspective, it's pretty hard.
So we have another question from Becky, and she's asking, what kind of ethical issues do you think we need to consider with web scraping? And also, if you have any product recommendations.
Okay, so no, I am definitely not giving you any product recommendations. That is a cheap shot, but great for asking, Becky. If you don't ask, you don't get. But so web scraping has got me into this stuff when I was talking about that Facebook story 10, 11 years ago, because I worked in a data company, and I found out that I could scrape so much information on individuals I could build a demographic profile with about 150 to 200 variables and a whole bunch of others with a really strong degree of predictive accuracy. Those individuals had never volunteered their data. They had never given me a right to use it other than publishing it to the web. And I wasn't right 100% at the time, but I was right a statistically significant amount of the time. So, should I use that data? Or could I use that data? I could, and I really, really wanted to. But actually, some really wise people counseled me from not using that data because it was, whilst it was available to me, it wasn't, the ethical framework that I used at that point was that it wasn't appropriate to use it without full permission or validation.
So
a year later, Facebook pops up and kind of some of the same stuff was happening.
So Becky just reiterated her second part of the question, and what she was meant to say was ethical issues with product recommendations.
Okay, so fine. So I've built a whole bunch of recommendation systems. So I actually don't have as much. I take the EU's principle on this, right? So it's about how much of an impact is it. So I was building recommendation systems for telcos, which would basically recommend a different product depending on your usage. That's a commercial thing. I mean, my head of data science went on to be eBay's head of analytics and recommendation systems, right? So whether you're recommending a cuddly toy or whatever, I don't make a big deal about that. If I'm recommending you healthcare or recommending whether you do social distance or don't social distance, that requires a different level of rigor and decision making. And that's the thing that I think is really interesting right now. This is not about applying Google or Amazon or eBay's recommendation algorithm. This is about healthcare of the nation and not just about one nation. This is about all nations. So it's a different degree of ethical involvement within that recommendation framework. And if Becky, that doesn't answer your question, great question, more than happy to follow up with you afterwards.
Fantastic, fantastic. So Toby, I think we have exhausted our young people with questions. They haven't asked any more questions, but I'm sure they will have more questions for you. I have sent you the link to the Discord channel by WhatsApp. If you can join us at least for half an hour or an hour after this call, we would be really grateful. I think it would be fantastic to have you. And I know, so just so you know, everyone, I have shared the Excel sheet with Toby. He knows what you're developing. So I've asked Toby if you have any contacts or anyone, any of the teams would like you think could speak to and benefit from, please let me know. So Toby will look through everything and let me know. I know he already had made some recommendations for me to speak to somebody who can help on all things mental health, because we do have a number of teams developing stuff addressing mental health, which is fantastic. So Toby, thank you so much once again. I'm not going to hold you here for longer because we do have another speaker, Florian, who already joined us, and this will be a tech talk. So Toby, I'm really grateful. And
see you later. Have fun, everyone. Bye.
Stay in touch. Bye. So Florian, good evening. How are you?